Nice to meet you. I'm Joy Getnick. I'm the executive director here at Hillel at the University of Rochester, which is pluralistic Jewish life on campus. And we are so thrilled and honored to welcome you this evening to hear the first person telling of Holocaust survivor Manny Gurowski's story. It's the first time we've had a survivor on our campus in a while. It's a real treasure, and we're really grateful that you all chose to be here this evening. Educating about the Holocaust, about anti-Semitism, honoring the legacy, remembering the survivors, remembering those who were lost is a really important part of what we do as a Jewish community, but it's not something we do just for the Jewish community. And a big part of Hillel's work here at the U of R is what we call campus climate, which is ensuring that the U of R remains a great and safe place to be Jewish for everyone, faculty, staff, students, guests of all kinds. We want to make sure that people understand the history of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, that they know how to recognize it, and so they can partner with us to ensure that never again is actually never again. Because that doesn't just happen. We believe that that takes a lot of hard work, and we're appreciative of those who choose to support us in that work that we're doing pretty much every day here on campus. I'm thrilled to be introducing our friend Michael Gurowski, who's going to be introducing his father. Michael is a fellow Jewish Rochesterian. He's been coming here to the Interfaith Chapel for High Holiday services for many years, and is a good friend of the campus and the institution. He and his family are, like us, so excited about the future of Jewish life and the Greenbaum Center for Jewish Life, which is going to be our new home in a few years, that he and his family selected a naming gift to honor his family's legacy and Lador Vador, and ensure that the past becomes the future and generationally Jewish life remains really strong. So we're really grateful to have him and his family here this evening. After Manny speaks, there's going to be a Q&A. People will be coming around with mics. So please wait until the mic is handed to you and try your best to ask questions so that we can keep the conversation going and give as many people a chance to speak as possible. And with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Michael, who's going to introduce his father.
Everybody, wow, what a great crowd. This is fantastic. As you're going to see in a minute, because I'm going to be very, very brief, my father has found the fountain of youth. So as a 90-year-old man, he looks pretty amazing, but as we all know, nobody lives forever. And if he wasn't willing to tell his story on a regular basis, which he never used to do, he never told his story until later in life. But if he didn't do that, then we would forget about it. So it's so important for events like this, where we come together as a community, as people, to, again, not forget what generations like his went through. Dad did not have it, you're going to hear about it, he did not have a childhood or a young adulthood. It was robbed from him through terror, bigotry, hatred, and but he has had an amazing attitude about life ever since that early period of time in his life. He's a kind, generous person. When they came to America, the family came here with absolutely nothing. They didn't speak English, they had no money, but both him, his sister, and his parents built great lives for their families, for my sisters, myself, and for his wife of 63 years, my mother, Sandy. So to have that type of attitude after what he went through is pretty powerful. And one last thing to say about that too, due to his kindness, generosity, there's a lot of people that don't treat people on the lower end of the totem pole with respect or kindness. Dad never lets a day go by where he doesn't treat somebody that's in a much worse place than maybe all of us are, with a kind word, a kind gesture, or what can I do for you today? So with that, I want to introduce my father, which I don't think I've ever done. So this is pretty cool. But students, so glad you're here. Friends, family, and community members, thank you so much for being here. Manny Gurowski. Wow. We do have a full auditorium, temple, whatever. Anyhow, good evening. The introduction for my son,
any father would just feel proud. And one what I like to tell all of you is pretty much state by state, day by day, hour by hour, what happened in Europe to millions of people. And as you know, millions did not make it. I'm one of the fortunate ones that did. So let me set the stage as far as where I came from. I was born in a very small town called Malichkin, a German name that was taken over by the Germans from Poland and reverted back and forth. It's located on the Baltic Sea. And the town consisted of one main street, and there were two Jewish families, ours and a apotheker, a pharmacist, and that's all there was. So any Jewish temple, anything was near there, was in the city called Gombinen, and for the high holidays, and matter of fact, that's where I was born, and my sister was born there. So my parents had lots of friends there. But as far as the town that we were in, there was no one other than the one I mentioned. Normally, the place that we lived in, we lived extremely well before all the other things started. On a typical day, there would be my dad and mother. There was a large store that they ran, and they dealt in horses and feed and seed and a farm supply. And I remember we had a nanny. I remember we had a cleaning lady or cook, whatever, and we had people that worked in the field. So we did not lack anything. I remember my father had his first Mercedes car, and there weren't probably two in the whole town, if that many. So life was just going on wonderful. So this is how I initially grew up until we had the first day of school. And the first day of school is still prior to Crystal Night that you all know about. But so my mother took me to school. The school was up the street near a church and near cemetery, and it's a one schoolhouse, small town. And the European custom is that you have a very large, like a candy thing, a cone filled with candy, and mothers or dads would take the kids to school. And so that was the beginning of my going to school. So we were all sitting down in the classroom, and I knew a couple of kids, but not many. And the teacher walks in. So everybody, good morning, good morning. And the first thing this guy said, "There's a Jew in this classroom." And these kids all look at each other. What's he talking about? I knew he was talking about me immediately. So then he said, "The Jew needs to stand up." So the tears are starting to come, and I didn't stand up. He pointed at me and he says, "Manfred," the German thing, "I want you to stand up right now." So I'm standing up, and he said to me, "Take your stuff. And this is the first and last day that you're ever going to go to school. Jews are not allowed here." So that was the beginning of my life changed completely overnight. Right after that, we all heard of Crystal Night, the night of broken glass. The store that was connected to our home was sort of connected, but there were large glass windows like any store would have, but the house had normal windows. And I remember that the woman that kind of worked for us was sleeping in the same area where my sister was sleeping, I was sleeping. And all of a sudden, it was dark out, middle of the night, I don't even know, but bricks are flying through the window. Shattered glass all over the place, and they're SS guys with the brown shirts, local guys that my father used to, in a small town in the farm community, this very customer that people go out and have a drink of schnapps, and my father's friends, some of them, he thought they were friends. And Max Gurowski always did well. He made money, he was highly educated under those days, and he built a tremendous business in that little town. Here comes a guy with the SS signature on his arm, band, and he arrested my dad. And he arrested them in handcuffs, and he took them out. And that's the last time we saw my father for a long, long time. He did survive because of, anyhow. So that's changed the next step. So here's Crystal Night, and my father was arrested. The next thing I knew was my mother was told to pack a bag, a house full of beautiful things, crystal and you name it, and everything was left. They took my mother and my sister and myself with a suitcase on an open truck and took us where we used to go to the market and where I was born, the city of Gambetta nearby, and we were herded out of our own home. That's the last time we seen our house, period. So, and we were into what they call the restricted area then, now what we call ghetto. It became a ghetto of people that were taken away from their homes. Up to that point, there is no shooting, no nothing. It just, we've been restricted into an apartment house next to an old temple. The old temple was burned down on Crystal Night, and all the books and everything else was burned. And we were given, not pajamas yet, that came later, but was given a Star of David, the yellow star. We had to wear it. My sister, 4 years younger, and we were restricted to the building they were in initially. And that's the first time ever that I started feeling, why aren't they feeding us? Why can't we? There was not enough food to go around for all the people that were in this sort of an apartment house. There must have been normally probably 5 families in it. All of a sudden there are 100 different people. So instead of sleeping on your bed, which you no longer had, you're now sleeping on the floor with straw and old blankets or whatever. And instead of going to a bathroom, there was a bucket in the corner, and everything changed completely. The food, very little food, no sanitation, but nobody really was murdered. And from there, life continued on that basis. They took a normal street. On each end of that street, they made a ghetto out of it. They had a big Star of David on each end of the street, and it said, Jews cannot cross this area, and if you do, you get arrested. P.S. you get shot. And the SS would guard both ends. They handed out ration cards with a big J on it, and they opened up one little grocery store in that area that would serve Jewish people food with that ration card for on a certain day for 1 hour, and there were, I don't know how many people were there, 500 or what more from that area. And the starvation started to set in. So all of a sudden, I had a grandmother that passed away there. She passed away probably partially from not having food, but mainly from being taken away from her home. And the bodies were just, that was the first one. And I'm a little kid yet. So all of a sudden, you're no longer a free person. You're not going to school. You don't have enough to eat. But it was not terrible. I still had buddies, we played and we did and whatnot. So from there, we were told that we were going to be transported to another place where it's much more freer and much more open, and we're going to work in fields. And so the one suitcase that my mother had, my father, as I said, he was arrested and gone. So my mother had to report with my sister and myself at the train station. The train station was the regular train station where normally regular cars came in, not freight cars, but regular passenger cars. The Germans hid everything they were doing. I didn't know it then, but I know what happened. So a regular passenger car came out, and there were the SS guys with the gun and all that. But it was sort of normal. People got on the train. The train didn't move. Once it got dark, the train moved. The train moved about a mile and it stopped. Everybody off the train for nice passenger cars and to a freight car. The freight car that you all see, it's for animals. The freight car consisted of a bucket of water at one end and a bucket for the toilet on the other end. And everything in the middle, people on top of people. And that freight car didn't move, and it's hot, and anyhow, it was horrendous. So little by little, but you're amazed what you get used to. So the sanitary conditions were unbelievable bad just on that freight car. Finally, that freight car got coupled onto other freight cars and the train moved. They took us to a city called Königsberg. It's now Kaliningrad. It is on the Baltic Sea, and we wound up, my mother, my sister, and I wound up in another ghetto. This ghetto was surrounded by barbed wire fences. They say they electrified. They had guards' houses on each end, and the real bad thing started. What they had us was a slave labor camp. The labor consisted of rounding every workable person up in the morning, and you stand. The Germans are very into counting heads, 1, 2, and East Prussia gets very cold. It's not Florida, and people are starting to collapse and die right next to me. So you start to see bodies piled up like a table right here, one on top of the other. And it's amazing how a human mind, I was a little kid, start to react. Well, it's not like you become like an animal, sort of, you just see things. But then, so after the Germans counted heads, which they were very famous to do, all SS guys with this insignia on their arm, all with a shotgun, all with a dog, with the German shepherds, and they pick on a certain person and beat them up and kill them right on the ground. And then finally, we marched out of the main gate into this area, part of the city, part of Kaliningrad, part of Königsberg. This is like summer, and we would be, and they gave me a job inside. The women were making soap powder, and the men were making gunpowder. The whole place was designed to make gunpowder. And the soap was a sideline, because any little spark, any little thing would have blown us all sky high. Plus the gunpowder, when they grind it, it was very bad for their health. Elderly people that worked there, they didn't last very long. This now became my new place. That's where we were living. They kept my mother was her background was a culinary institute graduate. She would make unbelievable, beautiful things to eat. And so they gave her the job as the kitchen to run the one kitchen that they had, a big boiled pot of water, soup, they call it soup, and one slice of bread. That's when we left in the morning to go to this factory. And they took our clothes away. They gave us pajamas, so the wind would blow right through it. And because, like I said, it's like a hot corn. But so my job, once I got there, my job, they gave me a wheelbarrow. And the wheelbarrow that I had, there was and from that wall to two different buildings. I had to take soap powder from one building and gunpowder back to the other building. But I always went by a fence, and the fence was there connected to the town. I mean, the Germans lived right there. So everybody really knew, if they disguised it or whatever, they knew that behind that fence, the Jewish slave labor. There were no other, they were just German Jews, because they didn't transport us to Buchenwald, Auschwitz, whatever you heard about. So this is my new home. I did this every single day. There was no sun up, no Sundays, it's just, we had to do that. But I'm the only one that did that soap powder back and forth. But as time went on, my mother stayed behind, and my sister was a baby. Really. And I could see my sister, and I wasn't at all. She's not gonna make it. I knew she was starving of starvation. She's just skin and bones, and it's just horrible sight. But while I was doing this wheelbarrow thing from one building to the other, I kept smelling bread. There was a bakery nearby, and one morning when I left, I thought I'd never going to see my sister again. I left with the rest of the people, and I knew I had to do something because I kept smelling this bread. So I had these pajamas on, but I was a little kid. I crawled under I left the wheelbarrow standing there. There was no guard there at the time. And I took a bunch of that soap powder in my pocket. It's like a ball. And crawled under the fence, the part that was not electric wire. And I knocked on the door of the back of a store. I didn't know that was a store, but I could smell it. And the woman answered, bakery. Because the minute she opened the door, I knew it was a bakery. And she saw me in my uniform, and she knew what I was there. Wait right here. So I waited, I gave her the soap, and she gave me a loaf of bread. So that loaf of bread wound up back in the bear, the camp, whatever you want to call it. That loaf of bread fed my sister and my mother and some other people. Well, I got away with it once, so why not try it again? I didn't do often, but I did do it. And then the winter set in, it snowed like crazy. It became easier because I could slide in the snow underneath the thing. And that woman with bakery really saved our life. I never ever saw her again after the whole thing happened. But anyhow, so that's went on for years. We still didn't know where my dad was. We still had no idea. My sister hardly hanging on. And then as time progressed, we could hear Allied bombers coming over. We knew that something is happening. Something is maybe going to liberate us. The elderly people talked to me and they said, they're coming, the Allies are coming, the Russians are coming, and they were coming. I know there was some other thing I was going to tell you that's sort of important. But in the meantime, we knew that something is happening. Oh, my first day in school, I told you, the guy, this SS teacher, whatever, he said, Jews are not allowed. There was a woman at the same ghetto camp who was a teacher. And to me, she looked like a grandma, old lady, nice lady. And she couldn't go to work at the ammunition factory. They kept her back. So my mother became friendly with her. And there was windstorms and, normal weather. And a piece of newspaper flew over the fence and she would take it. So when we got back at night from working at the factory, from sun up to sundown, she would have me come over to the corner and sit in the corner with her. There was one light bulb. There was no toilet. There was a bucket over there and water over there. So anyway, she straightened out the newspaper and she started teaching me how to read. A, B, C, she did. And and then my sister got a little better. Same thing with her. Her, she had more time with because my sister didn't have to go to this ammunition factory. And this went on for years. We made it all the way through up to that point. And then now it got really, we knew that, when all at night the sirens go off, because this ghetto was located right part of a major city. It wasn't on the outskirts, it was part of the inner city. And they used us for slave labor, but you knew, and then all of a sudden, the sky would light up and the searchlights would go on, and you see American bombers, and then you see British bombers, the insignia on, it was so like daylight when they put the flares down, and they leveled that city completely with phosphor bombs. They ignite anything. That was one time. My mother, on one of those nights, I don't remember how many nights this went on one of those nights, it got really bad. Everything is burning all around us, but no bomb ever hit where we were standing. The bomb hit the ammunition factory, and there was a bomb that went in. Whoever worked that shift, they all got killed. But my mother grabbed my sister and me. I was walking, she was carrying her, and when the fence came down and it was burning, She grabbed us and she ran into, there was a park nearby. And a park nearby had a lot of German civilians, a lot of them. Our tongue then, yeah, sure, English now, but German then. My mother, fluent in German, somebody talked to her. She knew, they knew where she was coming from because she wasn't dressed to go out on the street. So this guy took my mother, my sister, and myself, his apartment house, sort of an apartment house that he had in the city. He snuck us in, he put us in the basement, and he saved our life initially, okay? So all of a sudden there was more food. He didn't have much to eat either, but there was more food, and there was not to be collapsing while they wait you to take you to work because you were so weak. He took us in. When you think about it, I still have my teeth. We didn't have a toothbrush. I didn't even see a toothbrush. Things that you now think back on as an old man, we had nothing. We had pajamas and trying to get the next meal somehow, somewhere. So this man took us in. I happened to see, because he kept us in the basement, don't come out, don't come out. I spoke some German, but my mother's fluent. She was German. So I saw him, the Germans, SS, whatever, they had boots. The boots were different. They weren't army boots. They were these SS boots. They're like soft-skin boots and stuff like that. So I knew the guy he's a bad guy. He's just not good. And I thought for sure by the end he's going to kill us. But he didn't. So the Russian invasion came. They took over the city of Königsberg, where we were at, and we were in this basement. But while we were in that basement, there was a little window. I stood on a box. I'm still a little kid. I stood on a box and looked out, and I saw there was the main street, whatever street, the people that did not get out of that labor camp, or they came together. They didn't get out. They were marched. I just happened to see it. They marched down the street. The Baltic Sea is on the end of the street. It's a resort city. The Baltic Sea was on the end of the street. They put all of these people that were still in that labor camp on a barge. It was in April. The sea was still frozen. They put them on a barge. They took them out on the barge. They all threw them overboard. There was one survivor who wrote a book about it, and that's the only reason I know about it, because none of the people that didn't run or didn't hide somewhere and stayed in that ghetto were all killed, except for this one person that wrote the book and said, this is what happened. They took us out and they started throwing people overboard. And in April, up north, the water so cold, you only last for seconds anyhow. This guy got away from it, he got on shore, he survived, he wrote the book, and that's how it's in history. That's exactly what happened. So now here we are. Now we're liberated because the Russians are there, and we're in this basement of this guy. And all of a sudden, machine gun fires through the door of the basement, which is bang, 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 all these bullet holes coming through. And this guy is with us, but there were some other Germans there too, and they all with their hands up. Unfortunately, we had given new clothes. Unfortunately, we didn't have the Star David on Unfortunately, we're regular clothes, but now we look like a bunch of Germans. They're part of the Hitler thing. And the Russians didn't care. We're all on the street. The tanks are still going. The cannons are still going off. Bodies all over the place. And but now we're liberated. Okay, the first night, they took us away from the front lines, and they sorted out people. The Russians did sorted out people who the German soldiers were, who this one was, and that one is. And this guy that rescued us or saved us, he forgot one thing. He left his boots on. So there was no Nuremberg trial. There was nothing. They just took him behind the barn and shot him. That's wartime. So that he tried to save his skin by saving us, but it didn't work for him. Okay, but the other thing that the bodies, the people, and that labor camp, so-called ghetto, I saw more. But after a while, when you see bodies piled up, yay high, it didn't have a gas chamber. It didn't have a lot of stuff that we know about Buchenwald and all of the other. It didn't. These were slave labor people that were starved to death, worked to death, and worked to death, period. So here we are, we're in this huge field with a huge barn, and another miracle happened. We're still alive, my mother, my sister, myself. My father was gone since 1938, that Crystal Night thing when they arrested him. Here's my dad. In the same field, he went through hell and a lot of shit. I mean, really bad. But he was a tough man, a very, very tough man. So he made it. One of the very first, after embracing him, he said to my sister, look at me, cover up your mom. Cover up with hay, straw, whatever you find in the field, cover up, and then as the sun goes down, sleep on her. Because he came with the Russians, he knew what the Russians were doing. Every German woman that was in that field got raped that night. If they weren't willing, they got shot that night. There was no one that didn't. The Russians didn't care because the Germans did the same thing to the Russians when they invaded Russia. They were really bad, and they were getting even. So my father saved my mother, us, whatever, and he was right, because the screaming at night and the gunshots, screaming, gunshots, they were killing women. Okay, so now we're liberated. We're still not, all of a sudden we didn't even have the stuff. We're wearing civilian clothes. We marched for days, and again, no food. The Russians had no food. The war was still going. The food was always the problem. And but my father, he was the hero. And I have a grandson now. His name is Manny Gurowski. My father found this wagon. My mother couldn't walk, and we pulled the wagon, a little wagon. And he somehow, I don't know how he got it, but he really was a survivor. And like a bed sheet that was floating, and he got a charcoal on it, and he put a big Star of David on a stick, Star of David, and sure enough, a Russian Jeep goes by. He turns around, talks to my father, Yiddish, whatever, and he told them exactly what we should be doing, how to stay alive. I guess he gave us some bread, but we wound up in a slave labor camp of the Germans that the Russian had for the Germans, prisoner of wars, and of civilians working in fields. And they made my father the big shot, the Burgermeister. But once we'd survived, my dad, if other than embracing it, we're going to America. America, where is it? We're going to go to America. We are going to go. He worked away. We got on a train when Germany was still divided. The East German, plus the North German. We got on the train. We went up in Berlin, and the first thing the German Jewish population then, after the war, didn't believe that any Jews still survived, and it's just now gotten back into the city of Berlin, because Berlin was surrounded by, as you all know, different zones and different things. And anyhow, and the other first thing he did, write to an American consul, and there was a lot of time in between, but that's how we got to America. Because being here, so now in America, we were extremely fortunate. We're fortunate to begin with. That my sister and I survived is a miracle. My mother, miracle. My dad, they're all passed away. But matter of fact, the cemetery across the street from here, that's where they're buried. Anyhow, so I'm very lucky we survived. Sandy, my wife, extremely, a wonderful family. But basically, that's my story. I could go on and on about how badly things were and how, I mean, I had, my skin was hanging, I had these blisters, and my sister, it was definitely a miracle. So here we are, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. We're going to open the floor for questions, and Manny can stay up here and answer them. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll walk around with Solomon over there and myself. We have microphones, so we can walk around and let you ask questions.
After the liberation, after the war, were you in a displaced persons camp in Germany?
I have a problem.
Were you in a displaced persons camp in Germany after the war?
Yes.
Which one?
It was outside of Berlin. Steffeloff, a KP 10, right? But to answer your question straight up, again, because the German Jews knew a little bit more on some than the Russian and Polish Jews when they got there. My father flew in German. So he found a way to get himself in an old age home. He wasn't the right age in the American sector. My mother and he went there, and my sister and I went into a kindergarten in East Germany. On the weekend, we would see each other. And my father, I know you're asking a straight question, I'm going to down the road longer. My father got into a black market with three Polish Jewish guys, okay? They got a BMW. They were trying to get even what the Germans did to them, okay? They did nothing. So they found a way to get American cigarettes, Camel, Chesterfield, and also Cadbury chocolate. But the money wasn't any good. I mean, the phony money, it wasn't a dollar, it was occupation money. But there was suitcases for. Anyhow, that's to answer your question, okay?
I have two questions. The first was, you said that you understood some of the German that they were saying. Was that because you spoke Yiddish or a different language?
Our mother's tongue is German, okay? And Yiddish, yes, some. And German Yiddish is very similar to begin with. But I made my mind up to, once we got liberated, once I grew up to have hopefully some brains in my head, I didn't want to know anything with the German, no language, no nothing. I just bitter as can be. But guess what happened? I got drafted in the U.S. Army. And because of my language knowledge about German, I was sent overseas. Where to? I graduated from a Signal Corps in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And I thought I'm going to Paris, France. No such luck. I wound up in Berlin and Munich, Germany, and I hated being there, but I had a hell of a good time because I got even some little bit.
So you kind of touched on what was my second question of what did you do after the war? What was your career? What did you do here in the US?
What did I do?
Here in the United States, what was your job?
Oh, the sponsor that I had, because the British government, for kids like myself, after the war, they opened in Berlin, they opened up occupational school for kids that had no school. And what it consisted of, you are being taught the language, English in my case, or Israeli, or Hebrew, or also, because the kids that were left, a lot of them didn't have parents anymore. So most of them, including myself at that time, I was supposed to go to Israel. And it turned out to be, luckily we're here. So I'm not saying that I wouldn't have gone to Israel, but I wouldn't have gone any place, even Germany. So that school, like myself, had no school. I told you what happened the first day. That you would go to school at 7 a.m., Monday through Saturday. You have a regular education as far as the language is concerned, reading, writing, arithmetic, and the other from 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock at night, you were taught a trade. There was dentistry, beautician, electronics, which I took. And that's how things happened for me in the United States with Zenith Electronics, let's put it that way, okay? So a lot of kids weren't as fortunate as I was to have parents left, but they also had no education either. So, but the British government and the American government opened up the schools that helped people like myself.
Are there some more questions from the audience? Any on that side?
Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
When the bombing raids started, did you guys try to do any sabotage or anything like that? Or just kind of hide?
Oh. Yes. That bitterness doesn't go away. Okay, all of a sudden you're free and all this stuff. The only time that I could get even with some things, and I thought about it, how bad can it be, you know? So once I was stationed as a GI, an American soldier, in a small town up in the Bavarian Alps where the radio station was, it was like a holiday to begin with. I mean, I didn't see Korea, didn't see Vietnam. I missed both of those, which is very fortunate. But I'm in the Jeep, and the bicycle's on the side, he'd be flying off the side. stuff like that, you know. The Germans, I'm not saying all of them are bad, but here is this small radio station. There are 7 GIs there. And the Germans lost the war. And we go down to the town, and there is a Gasthaus, a restaurant and a bar. And this, before I ever got there, we leave one at the side, and 6 guys go down. We eat there every day, we had a beer every day, you know, all of those things. And once I got there, I never told the other guys, that I spoke German. I have broken English, but I didn't speak German. So we're in this restaurant, and my second time and third time there, the waiters, it's a family runs the restaurant. So we ordered food and we got the bill. And I said, you guys paid this? Yeah, that's what I said, well, the menu says 6 and you paying 12. Why does it make sense? And then, well, we didn't know that. So I went there 3-4 times, and I went in the kitchen. And this is about getting even. And I went in the kitchen and said, in German, all of it, no good, blah, blah, blah. And all 4 other words. And I said, you guys, you still fighting the war? You don't like Americans? They liberated you, and you're still doing this shit? And from then on, none of us overpaid, and I never paid for a single meal.
All right, we have time, I think, for one more question.
I'm just interested in knowing, Manny, how you end up in Rochester. What brought you to Rochester, New York?
And what year?
Okay.
And what year, and what brought you to Rochester?
First of all, I'm going to answer it that way. It was the best thing that ever happened to us as family and everything else. The less family represented right here is we needed a sponsor. The organization had us going to Sioux City, Iowa. Okay, some farm country. We came from farm country. Probably wouldn't have been too bad, but my dad said, no. We need to go where his sister. That's so somehow it worked out that the less family got a hold of our name. He can answer better than I can, but they sponsored us to come to Rochester, New York. So when we got to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, that's when the Coney Island, whatever, already closed. We were told we're going to Rochester, New York. And I remember that they took us to the train station in Manhattan and got on a train. And the first people that we saw, my father, the last family is waiting for us at the train station in Rochester, New York. And that's where it all started. From there, I started going to school, my sister did, and we got married here, grandchildren here, beautiful family here. And now we're sort of in between. We're not here anymore, but that's Florida, or most of it. It's, anyhow, but that's, the gratitude is with the Les family. They stepped up, and because the sponsorship, but because we were so late in coming here, the war was long over. We didn't get out but the Russians kept us. So we weren't on the regular cycle that normally would have gotten us here.
Your fashion.
What? That's not a good story. My father, when he was an entrepreneur all the way through. and it's rubbed off in this family over here. But anyhow, there, he definitely wanted to get even with the Germans. So when he got into the black market in Europe, they went, you know, on the inner tubes on the vehicle, the tires. These guys would drive over the border to Switzerland. He was one of them. And they filled up the tires with coffee beans. And the trunk, a phony trunk with Camel cigarettes. I mean, there was a black market going on in Europe. People didn't have enough to eat. So he made a lot of money, but the money wasn't any good. There was script money. It was when $0 to $1. You could buy stuff over there, but so he got arrested. And when he got arrested by the Germans, they pulled the visa to go to the United States. That's why we never got to the United States until 1951. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for coming. Safe travels home. We really appreciate your presence this evening.